Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time of day you choose to watch this. Settle in, get comfortable. It's a long story. It's a story for 5 to 10-year-olds to moms, dads, and grandparents. And this is a folk tale that comes from Spain. I told my children that I teach this story, and they loved it very much. Once upon a time, there was a man who had the most beautiful flowers for sale. He walked through the village, calling out, "Who will buy sorrow? Who will buy grief?" All the people of the village shook their heads and laughed and thought, who would buy sorrow? Who would buy grief? And not a one of them purchased any flowers from him. So he walked still further on, and this time he came to a palace. Oh, the beautiful princess looked out the window when she saw the flowers that he was carrying. He called out to her, "Who will buy sorrow? Who will buy grief?" She shook her head and thought, "There is no sorrow, there is no grief in these flowers. They are the most beautiful in the world." He thanked her. She threw down some gold pieces. He thanked her again and went on his way. The princess then called to her maiden and said, "Let us get the gardener and have him plant these flowers." So they went outside to help the gardener choose where to plant the flowers. They were very happy because it made such a wonderful place. The palace was now blooming everywhere with flowers from the man. The princess said to herself, "How could this bring sorrow? How could these beautiful flowers bring grief? It must not be so." So they planted and planted all day long. When evening came, it was time for all to go to sleep. And so they did. The princess could hardly sleep a wink that night. She was so excited to look at her flowers the next morning. So, at the break of dawn, she woke up, called to her maiden and said, "Let us go out and help the gardener water the flowers." They went out together. The gardener found just a few more flowers to plant. They watered and watered, and before long, a rabbit hopped up out of the flowers. "Oh," said the maiden, "let me catch him." She took some ribbons and tied them around his neck and led him all around the garden. When it was time for her to go inside, she hoped she could bring the rabbit in. But the rabbit ran away quickly. Oh, on this very night, the princess could not sleep a wink. She was distressed. She had lost her ribbons, but more than that, she had lost that beautiful white rabbit and felt quite full of sorrow. The next morning, they went out to the garden once again, taking with them the gardener and the watering can and began to work. Before long, the rabbit hopped out of the flower garden again, and this time the princess took her scarf from her neck and tied it around the rabbit's neck, led him all through the gardens throughout the palace. And when it was time to go in, the rabbit hopped away again. The princess was so sad, she put herself to sleep. But once again, she could not sleep a wink. She had lost her scarf, but more importantly, she had lost the white rabbit that she was longing to keep. On the third day, they went out once again to water the flowers. The gardener helped them. And once again, the rabbit hopped out of the flowers. This time, the princess tied her sash around his neck. She let him follow her all through the palace gardens. They walked and walked until sunset, when she hoped the rabbit was so tired he would join her in the castle and sleep in her room. But no, once again he ran away and was nowhere to be seen. That night, on the third night, the princess was more sad than any other evening. Her maiden sat beside her, trying to comfort her. Well, the very next day, she could not get out of bed. She was filled with such sorrow and such grief. Her father called all the doctors in the land and said, "Please help me with my daughter, the princess." They came, consulted, and said, "Let us bring musicians, jugglers, circus acts, all who could cheer her up." These people came. The whole grounds of the castle was filled just like a fair. It was a great time, but the princess was not cheered. Her heart was full of sorrow and grief. It went all throughout the land. Could anyone come and help to heal the princess of her sorrow and grief? Well, there were two sisters living in a cottage, and the one sister was a storyteller. I shall go and tell her a story. Her sister said, "I do not believe you can make the princess be cheered." "But I must try," said the sister. So she wrapped herself a piece of baked fish and a loaf of bread, put it in her basket, and began her journey to the castle. As she was old, she had to sit and rest at milestones along the way, and she did so. She continued on, and at the very next milestone, she saw something that surprised her. All at once, the entire earth opened up, and out came a donkey, led by two hands on its bridle. "Oh," thought the old woman, "what could this be?" She waited until the donkey returned, and once again it was being led by two hands holding its bridle. The woman shook her head in astonishment and decided she would follow the donkey. The earth opened up, and down, down, down they went, deep into a tunnel. After the tunnel, they came to a place where there was the most glorious light. The meadow was filled with the most beautiful flowers, sweet-smelling, birds singing. It made everyone's heart full of joy who saw it. Beyond that beautiful meadow filled with light, there was a castle. The storyteller went into the castle, and there she saw in the front room a table set ready for a meal. 2 hands brought her a bowl of soup. They ladled it out, and she ate. 2 hands took the soup away. Then 2 hands brought her a plate of roast beef. She ate heartily, and 2 hands took her plate away. Then 2 hands brought her a goblet and poured wine. And when she was finished, 2 hands took the goblet away. Now it was getting very late, and the storyteller was getting tired. She went into the next room, and there she saw a bed, a white quilt laid out. In 1 minute, 2 hands took the quilt, fluffed up the pillow, and the old woman lay down to sleep. 2 hands covered her. She slept well that night. And the very next morning, she awoke and thought she must return to the upper part of the earth. But before she could get out of bed, she sat up in her bed and saw the most unusual sight. A rabbit hopped into a pail of water, and out came a handsome prince. He looked in the mirror, combed his hair, and said to the mirror, "Who is it that feels such sorrow and such grief on my behalf? Who can it be?" The storyteller listened, but there was no answer, and within the next minute, the prince jumped back into the pail of water, and out came a white rabbit. Oh! She was quite astonished and got out of bed. She went back to the dining room, and there she was given a bowl of porridge by 2 hands. She ate and sat there and waited until the donkey, who was led with 2 hands, came out. The storyteller followed the donkey through the meadow filled with the most glorious light. Through the dark, dark, dark tunnel, the earth opened up, and she was once again at the milepost where she had started. Oh, she thought, this is a story that will be good for the princess. So she continued her journey and came near the castle. She saw those flowers, did not know they were the flowers of sorrow and grief, but knocked on the castle door. The gardener came and said, "May I help you?" "Yes," said the storyteller, "I would like to tell a story to the princess." "Oh," said the gardener, "no one has been able to make our princess smile. She is filled with such sorrow and such grief. May I try?" Yes. And so he opened the door and let her in. She came to the room where the princess was sleeping, said good morning, and said, "I have a story to tell you." The princess was so full of sorrow and grief, she did not even say good morning. The storyteller began, "I was on my way here, when all at once, as I sat by a milepost, the earth opened up before me. A donkey was led by two hands on its bridle, and down into a tunnel we went, out into the most beautiful light, filled with the brightest and most sweet-smelling flowers. And then, when I awoke the next morning, a white rabbit jumped into the pail and out again. As a handsome prince, "A white rabbit," said the princess. "We must go see him." And so, the very next day, the three of them set off, the storyteller, the maiden of the princess, and the princess herself. They walked all the way to the milepost, and there they waited until the donkey with the golden panniers, the donkey who was led by two hands on its bridle, came. As that donkey came in sight, the earth opened up. The donkey was led down through a dark, dark tunnel, and all three followed, the princess, her maiden, and the storyteller. They came to the light and were so enamored of the beautiful flowers. They stopped a moment to smell and to listen to the birds and smiled. They went into the castle, and there they saw many hands busily sweeping the floor, cooking, baking bread, hands dusting, scrubbing floors. They did not understand what all these hands were doing. They went on and on until they came to the last room, and there they saw on the floor, half man, half animal, dead. "Oh," said the dear princess, "how is it that someone has died, and no one has lit a candle, and no one has put a flower out, and no one has said a prayer for his salvation?" So the princess herself lit the candle, placed a flower on the heart of the dead one, and knelt down to say a prayer. As she knelt there, all at once, the handsome prince rose and said, "You have freed me from my enchantment." And all the hands that were busy at work became human. "Oh," said the princess, "what is happening here?" The prince cried out, "There has been someone betrothed to me with sorrow and sadness, and it was foretold that I must marry this person." The princess had fallen in love with the beautiful prince, and she said, "Oh, it is I who you were bound to. You were bound to me with a ribbon, with a scarf, and with my sash. Oh, said the handsome prince, then will you marry me? Yes, said the princess. The prince's father came forth and said, let us prepare for the wedding in 3 days' time. The princess's father came from her castle to join in the celebration. The two were very happily married, and each one inherited the kingdom from their fathers, so that 2 kingdoms were united. They lived happily with the storyteller, who was pleased to share in their good fortune. But she said, I do miss my sister and my own poor little cottage. Oh, we shall let you go. So they gave her a golden coach laden with gifts, and the storyteller bid them goodbye. Now, all the sorrow and all the sadness that had come with the flowers was bright with joy, for the handsome prince and beautiful princess lived happily with their family and all the days, and as far as we know, they are living there still. Story, story of the day. Do not go very far away, for your treasures I want to keep, so please come back to me when I sleep. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this story from Spain, and I would like you to take some time after listening to it for 3 separate days to make a book of this story. You can write what you heard. You can draw pictures. Please do both. You will have lots of fun with it, sounding out all the words, making the story, perhaps creating a new story, and share it with your mom, dad, friends, cousins, all who can be within your reach during this time. Thank you.